Alright, One Piece chapter 1090 is finally here, so let's just get right into it. And I think I need to start off by talking about this Elbaf panel. I will go back and review the whole chapter sequentially just like I did last video, but this moment right here is the highlight of the entire chapter for me because it confirms what so many of us have been waiting to hear, and that's that our next island is indeed Elbaf. Now, to be honest, I do think there's a good chance we're gonna have a small detour before that because Oda just loves to add detours before major arcs like Fishman Island or Wano, but still, simply hearing that Elbaf is a destination for our crew is massive. Now, there were already a lot of reasons to think that this was going to be the case beforehand, and one of them was that Oda literally showed us that Elbaf was positioned near Egghead already, and in the direction our crew needs to go. We saw this at the end of Wano when Luffy, Law, and Kid picked all their straws to decide where each crew was going, and Luffy got the shortest one. So he went to Egghead, which was the furthest off the path they're all going on, which is presumably to the end of the New World and thus Lodestar Island. So the crew would have already been at Elbaf if Kid just didn't pick the longer straw. Now, I do think it's really interesting that Oda's using the log pose in this way though, because usually our crew has the opposite problem that we're seeing here, where the crew needs to wait longer for it to calibrate, or it just takes so long to calibrate that they can't wait that long. That's what happened at Little Garden actually, where we first ever heard of Elbaf. It took an entire year to calibrate the log pose there, but Sanji found an eternal pose to Alabasta from Mr. 3's Wax House thing. So now we're seeing the reverse situation basically, where the fact the pose hasn't updated yet is helping the crew, and it's even pointing them back to Dory and Brokey, which is pretty dope if you ask me. But alright, let's go back to page 1, and I just want to say we're almost at 1k subs, so if you wouldn't mind dropping a like and subscribing to the channel, that would be amazing. But I think the most notable thing here at the start is what we learned from Saturn. He says there are 3 things they must secure: York's safety, Punk Records, and the power station. The rest can be sacrificed if necessary. And then he also goes on to say that human life holds no more value than that of an insect. No matter how far their numbers dwindle, it's always possible for them to multiply again. There's probably like 3 videos worth of ways you could read into what he just said right there, because on one hand, he's basically saying that advanced technology is more important than human lives, even including a ton of Cypher Pole agents, including Lucci and Kaku. And I think this mindset was even illustrated last chapter where he mentioned destroying that evacuation ship of researchers, paralleling the one Akainu destroyed in Ohara. We know the Ancient Kingdom was extremely advanced, like on the level of Vegapunk or higher, so the fact that Saturn values this technology so highly, as does Imu, who actually asked for the Mother Flame to be used in the first place, tells me that this is probably similar to what happened 900 years ago that led to the Void Century. And then that ties to the other layer of Saturn's words, because he even went as far to mention that humans will multiply again no matter how low their numbers get. Could Saturn have seen this happen at some point in the past, maybe, like during the Void Century? We don't know exactly how old the Gorosei truly are just yet, of course, but thanks to Ivankov, we know there was a Nerona Emu 800 years ago. So I think the Gorosei being centuries old as well is a pretty safe bet for now at least. So I think that Saturn probably participated in creating a situation very similar to the one he's describing right here. And maybe that's what Ethan Baron v. Nushjuro meant a couple hundred chapters ago by saying that a great cleansing may be needed. I mean, we just saw that a giant flood occurred after using the Mother Flame, and that caused tons of catastrophic events around the world, so maybe this is what they're talking about. They're all already trying to do exactly what Saturn just said. I mentioned the flood idea in depth in this video on the main channel if that interests you. I think the stocks are kind of going up on that one right now, I think, but it's going to be interesting to see how this all pans out, because you can even see Doberman being kind of visibly shaken by this. I don't think most Marines really agree with Saturn's mindset. I mean, even later in the chapter, we see Kizaru pushing back on some of what Saturn was saying, and just last chapter, Kizaru was saying that he's a cog in the machine. So this is definitely something to keep an eye on, I think. We also see Lucci leaking some intel out to the Marines during the scene with the whole crew, which could be an interesting situation later on if he finds out Saturn kinda just said he's expendable if needed. Saturn did say he was only stating the worst case scenario, but regardless, if Lucci sees at some point the Marines aren't all that interested in saving him or the other agents, especially after he sent the Marines all that intel, I wonder if that'll be another crack in the Marines' armor in terms of how bought in everyone is, I guess. But then we also skip to the basement with the other Cypher Pole agents as well as the Seraphim, who were simply defeated by Bubbles. And this actually makes a lot of sense because we saw earlier in Egghead that these canceled their fruit powers. So by having them inside of a bubble, it's almost like they're in a complete sea stone cage almost. I also love that Oda showed us Mihawk's sword being separated from him, because if it wasn't, he could just cut the bubble, so it was kind of cool that he included that. And then something that I think will matter a lot going forward is this sequence with Boa and Luffy specifically because of what it means for lineage factor, that the traits being passed on go far deeper than Vegapunk expected. So like I said earlier, technology is kind of the focus of the entire story right now with what we know about the Ancient Kingdom, as well as the Mother Flame, and inherited will is one of the most important themes in the entire story of One Piece. So now we're seeing that you can inherit a will biologically via lineage factor, even when you're cloning, as evidenced by what we just saw. But you can also inherit a will by meeting someone and being influenced by them, which we've seen oh so many times in the story. So I think this plot line with lineage factor is going to keep being focused on going forward for sure. But then we get to this scene where York has a passcode on the Frontier Dome, and I'm just going to call it now, this passcode is going to be something goofy as hell. It'll probably have something to do with food because she's always eating, and she even said in this panel afterward that all this laughing's making me hungry. So yeah, whatever it is though, Oda's going to make a joke out of it, I think. But then we get to the Elbaf sequence, which I already talked about. But then we get to hear Vegapunk and Frankie discuss plans to escape the island via the Vega Force, and since it needs to be near Punk Records for the aircon in order to work the anti-grav technology, they're going to use a Kude burst at the end to go another kilometer. And I love this panel right here between Frankie and Vegapunk. I've been waiting for this type of energy between them for the entire arc, because remember, Vegapunk is Frankie's role model. Seeing Vegapunk being surprised by the cola was unironically one of the highlights of the entire chapter for me. And Frankie also uses cola in his own body, as we all probably know, and I think this could lead to a future discussion about some kind of upgrade for that cola in the future. So check out my friend Hidden Island's video for more info on how the green blood could tie into that if you want. So then we get to see some of the gang actually running towards the Vega Force, and we also see Bonnie has had a complete change of attitude after seeing Kuma's memories in that bubble and crying all night apparently. But it is refreshing to see that she's had a bit of a change of heart and is now on board to helping everyone escape, because I assume she found things out like what Kuma's past was like as a slave, why Kuma allowed himself to be turned into a cyborg and eventually a full robot, I think. Maybe even why he's going to the Red Line right now, maybe some circumstances regarding her own birth, and all kinds of things like that. And she even mentions wanting food, which is very on brand for her. She also complimented Sanji by saying, man, that guy's great, a chef who can fight. And man, if Sanji heard that, he'd legitimately be a liability for the rest of the arc, so it's good Oda had him separated, I think. But then we get into this strategy discussion between Kizaru, my favorite admiral in the story, and Saturn about how to approach their initial attack. And I love how Kizaru had the gumption to push back a little bit and say that flying over Sentomaru would be just like spitting in his face. He's kind of enacting his own sense of justice in at least a small way. And not only does it show that he will stand up to the Gorosei, even if just slightly, because he did have some other reasons for it, but he also has some kind of respect for Sentomaru. Kizaru wanted to go about this his own way, and it's probably because Sentomaru is his nephew, which is likely more of a Yakuza type connection, but still. And the Marines also make some other smart strategic moves, like having 6 powers users go to shore immediately, going in to free the Cypher Pole agents, and shooting cannons at sea beasts instead of the Pacifista. I love seeing competency from the Marines because every buster call that we've ever seen in the story has been an abject failure. O'Hara has failed because Robin escaped, Saul even lived, and the books weren't even burnt, which was a massive reason they were kind of going there. And then Eni's lobbies failed because the crew still escaped. And then Sabaodi's failed because everyone escaped there as well. So obviously our crew isn't going to die here or anything, so the Marines are going to fail to some degree, but seeing some competency here does make me think that our crew will have a really tough time escaping, and may even have to make some kind of sacrifices along the way, like maybe some more Vegapunks or something. Then we see Kizaru bounce his light through the Egghead lab to reach Sentomaru, who blocks it while saying his guard is the toughest in the world. This totally fits his aesthetic because he's basically a sumo wrestler, and he even has some attire that would make you think it's from Wano potentially, which is totally possible because he was also really good at armament hockey, and even the advanced version because he didn't need to actually make contact, and we learned that from Hyogoro in Wano. Sentomaru also used this same line about the world's greatest defense against Luffy and Sabaody as well, so it's going to be really fun seeing this get tested against Kizaru. Even though Sentomaru did get cooked by Lucci earlier in this arc, but still, the familial ties here could make this fight a little harder for Kizaru to go all out like Lucci did, who was also awakened at the time. So then we end with this somewhat ominous panel where Luffy says that someone really strong is coming. I definitely think he's talking about Kizaru here, and you can even see what I believe are bits of light to the side of the panel to indicate that, so this is definitely going to put some respect on my boy Kizaru's name, and it might even show Luffy has a bit of trauma from the last time we saw him. I mean, Kizaru was there when Sabaody happened, he was there when Marineford happened, and now he's here at Egghead. So I think Luffy detected his voice or haki or whatever, and immediately knew shit was about to go down. So while I do definitely think that's Kizaru, I do want to mention one thing about Saturn, and that's that we still don't have an answer for the shadow that we saw attacking cameras earlier in the arc. To me at least, it looks a lot like a silhouette of Saturn, although it is a pretty small panel obviously. seriously. And if Luffy is feeling this type of way about Kizaru already, then I wonder how he's gonna feel about Saturn when he pulls up. If the shadow is really him and it was sent that long ago, maybe he can send his shadow remotely or something. I mean, Imu's powers seem to be shadow based, or at least they look that way. It could be ink or space or something else, but it just makes me wonder if Saturn is tied to this mystery that we still need answered. And then as for predictions for 1091 and beyond, I think it's interesting that Oda still hasn't shown us Blackbeard's crew at all on Egghead. I mean, it's only been a couple chapters, of course, since we got back here, but it was the last thing we saw before Oda showed us Elbaf and the Reverie and Hachinosu, etc. So it's ominous that Oda still didn't show us whoever pulled up from Blackbeard's crew, especially because Blackbeard's whole thing is sneaking in last second and doing something kind of underhanded. I still think it's going to be Lafitte and Katarina Devon who are on that ship, and they are infiltrator type characters, so it makes sense that they would have stayed undetected, but it's still just a major plot point Oda has to use somehow. And I'm wondering if that's ironically going to tie to Caribou, because we still haven't seen him since earlier in this arc. And one major issue with Vegapunk's plan that he stated is that he's leaving Punk records behind. That thing is literally his brain. If somebody damages it, it's like damaging his actual head. He should be trying to bring it with him if possible. I know it'd be tough because it's so massive, of course, but bringing it with him would theoretically let the Vega Force keep flying as well because it would have the aircon in it. But the thing is, Caribou's ability lets him store as much stuff as he wants in his swamp body or whatever. So I wonder if that's how Punk Records ends up getting transported. But if that's the case, I'm not sure if it'll actually be the Straw Hats and the Stella who get to take advantage of it. Maybe it'll be Blackbeard, because Caribou mentioned at the end of Wano that a certain someone would want to hear the news about where Pluton is, and of course Caribou also knows where Poseidon is. And while I love the idea that Caribou is Mr. 10 from Baroque Work, so he's working with Crocodile, shout out to Randy Troy for that one, I think Blackbeard also makes a ton of sense. Those are probably my top two options if I had to guess. And if it is Blackbeard, then maybe Caribou called him a while ago, explained what's happening on the island and that he would need a ride out of there, and in the process they use him to steal Punk Records. Blackbeard could maybe also kidnap York as well so they can access it, which would then actually give him 2 of the 3 goals the government was just going for. So he might as well go for all 3 and get the power source too. Give my mans all of it. He also has Garp, who he can sell for 3 billion berries, so if he has York, Punk Records, the power source, and a bunch of money, who knows what types of weapons he will gain at his disposal going into the final war. And he even has Pudding, who can actually access memories, so him getting Punk Records just makes a ton of sense to me. And I actually did a video on that on the main channel quite a while ago that you can check out right here if you're interested. But hey, that's the end for this video, so until next time, later.